Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old, an anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. Later this week, I'm doing a speech in Amsterdam at the Sogeti Executive Summit, one of my favorite events of the year. And I'm speaking about whether we can trust big tech to design our agentic future. In other words, can we trust big tech, the big tech companies like OpenAI and Google and Microsoft and Apple, with our AI future? And I thought I would begin our conversation today by asking my guest, Jim Fruchterman, the author of Technology for Good, and a man who's dedicated his life to making the world a better place through technology, to help me answer this question. Jim is joining me from Queens in New York. He's normally based in Palo Alto, down the road from where I am, but this week he's been at the UN celebrating their 80th year anniversary. Jim, can we trust big tech with our agentic future? Help me with this speech.
Let's just say, while I work with big tech, I'm a little skeptical that they're going to do the right thing when the right thing conflicts with the make a lot of money thing. I mean, if you look at the history of these companies, to varying extents, if they had a choice between, I don't know, kids' safety and making more money, they pretty much always pick making more money. So I would be a little bit more skeptical. I mean, obviously we're watching this. Obviously, I think they're hyping the heck out of this stuff. And since I'm the AI guy that many nonprofit leaders know, I'm saying, well, let's zero in on a few places where it really does work and let them blow hundreds of billions of dollars trying to figure out what is going to make them money. And we'll wait and see how that works out.
What should we make, Jim, of guys like Sam Altman? I mean, guys like Sam Altman. There's only one Sam Altman, and there's only one OpenAI. He seems split between a man very much for profit and a man committed to the social good, just as OpenAI has this rather odd corporate structure between its non-profit and its for-profit arm. It's currently, I think, almost $1 trillion private company. So this is a significant thing. Can one be split like Altman or OpenAI between for-profit and for good?
Well, I think that when you have two halves like that, one wins. I mean, if you're really a charity, you should always be picking society's good over making money. If you're a for-profit and you say you're going to do social good, when push comes to shove, you're going to pick the profit side. And AI flipped, right? They started with a nonprofit mission. And I'd say right now, the nonprofit mission is lost. And that's because they decided that they had to play in the big money games and they had to take for-profit money. And, you know, when Sam got fired and then got unfired, that was a statement about which side won.
Tell me a little bit about yourself. You're based in Palo Alto, Jim. You have a wonderful visual image of your education and your career. Have you always been, you haven't always been in the nonprofit, you've also been in the for-profit world. So
absolutely.
How did you go from for-profit to nonprofit?
Well, you know, I took a kind of a standard approach. I showed up in Silicon Valley because I thought I was going to be a research professor and get my PhD from Stanford, and then dropped out to join a startup and then another startup and then another startup. And I actually ended up starting some of the early AI companies back in the 80s. So fresh out of school in my 20s. And the reason I went in this nonprofit direction was my investors who had invested $25 million in my company. So that was a lot of money back in those days. they vetoed a social good project because our technology could be used to help route the mail, scan tax forms, help lawyers, scan in docs, and it could also help the blind. And I built a prototype product with our tech team and showed it to our investors. And when they found out that the market for reading machines for the blind was $1 million a year, they vetoed it in the very same board meeting for excellent business reasons. And I went, well, I want to do it anyway. So I started a nonprofit on the side, told my wife I would do it for a year. And here we are 35 years plus later. And I've really spent almost all that time in the nonprofit sector doing the same thing I did in Silicon Valley, start companies, but starting companies that have a social good inside a charity form.
Has your wife forgiven you?
She says I'm much nicer as a nonprofit executive than as a tech executive. I mean, it's a pressure cooker when you raise a lot of money from the VCs. You make big promises and you have to honor them. And that's a lot of stress. And so I think that after taking that year and then another year and then another year, and finally I had to choose whether I was going to be in the for-profit world or the nonprofit world. And she endorsed sticking with the nonprofit world. And I was a happier guy and I had more time for our kids. And so, and I've never regretted it. Didn't make as much money as I could have, but boy, I love what I do. And the stress is a lot less, and it's for a better reason than when it was just getting rich in Silicon Valley as a tech founder.
As I said, I'm doing this speech later this week. Can big tech be trusted to design our agentic future? Let me change that.
Yeah.
And suggest, can we trust nonprofit public good guys like Jim Fruchterman to design our agentic future, our tech future? Why should we trust you? Not you personally, but nonprofit leaders like you with our future. We did a show a few weeks ago about Bill Gates's behavior in Kenya. It's quite controversial. I'm not going to get involved in what I think about Gates, but certainly Tablet ran a cover story last month questioning some of Bill Gates's behavior and investments in Kenya. So why should we trust guys like Fruchterman or Gates? Why are they more reliable, more moral, better for the future than, I don't know, Sam Altman or Elon Musk or anybody else in Silicon Valley?
Well, I think that you get what you package, right? What your form in a lot of ways determines what you are. And the average nonprofit leader could be making a lot more money being in the for-profit world. I know that really well. They've taken a binding commitment to use their energies, whatever money they're donated, whether it's from Gates or other people, to advance the needs of society. We're not there to stand in for the for-profit world. I mean, if the for-profit world is going to make money doing something, they're really good at doing something. I'm a believer in innovation that's funded by that. But 90% of humanity, not so interesting to the for-profit world. And so I think that if you look at, and I think I've already alluded to, what happens when you become, a billionaire or a company that wants to make you a billionaire, you have to be really relentless about making money. And you're going to walk over people who are getting in the way. And it's just the way these things are packaged. And I think Bill Gates is a really interesting example, right? I mean, I grew up in Silicon Valley when Bill Gates was the enemy of Silicon Valley, right?
The Antichrist,
Antichrist, yeah, exactly. And why? Well, because you knew that if he decided to enter your market, he would kill you off in a second if he could figure out how to do that and take your market. So let you pioneer it, then come in and knock you out. So he was hated. Now it's 20, 25 years later, and he's got, a lot more demigod rather than Antichrist vibe going for himself. But the tension, and I haven't read the piece you're talking about, but I'm kind of guessing, Bill Gates's for-profit side is investing in stuff that creates harm, and the nonprofit side is investing in things that generally do good. And, I remember there was an early piece in, the Sacramento Bee 15 or 20 years ago about how, smokestacks were like spewing stuff and causing people to be sick. And Gates was invested in that. And then his charity was treating the kids who had asthma, in the shadow of these factories. So this mix between which hat is he wearing? Is he wearing his investor hat or is he wearing his philanthropist hat? By and large, I admire Bill Gates as a philanthropist. The one thing that he does that almost no one does in philanthropy is he owns up when he screws up. He has got out there and said, I spent $200 million on small high schools and it didn't work. Here's why it didn't work. You may choose to do this, but don't do it because Bill Gates went in there because it didn't work. And I'm going to share that with you. Almost no one admits to failure in philanthropy. In business, you can't run from failure, right? You're either making money or you're not. The nonprofit sector, it's a lot grayer. And, he stepped up to it.
Yeah. And I think in the Kenya example, the critique is that in order to do what he wanted to do in Kenya in terms of vaccines, he had to make certain compromises with a highly authoritarian, very unpopular government in Kenya. So there are always political compromises that philanthropists like Gates have to make, although I'm not sure everyone would necessarily agree with that. What do you think of the Gates-Carnegie model of spending half your life making a fortune and the second half giving it away? You haven't led that life. You could have, though. I mean, if you'd have stayed a bit longer in the for-profit AI world, you may be Sam Altman now.
Well, I'm not going to comment on whether I would have made more money if I'd stuck with it longer. But I think that, we have seen, more and more philanthropists following Bill Gates's Giving Pledge kind of model. But I think that it was probably more like, Skoll and Omidyar, the two founders of eBay, committing to launch their wealth in their 30s, right? They made billion-dollar commitments in their 30s. They didn't wait till they were 70. And so Gates, got started in his 30s and 40s, but he didn't really hit his stride until his 50s, I think. And so I think this idea that people are getting into this earlier, are committing to not die on a giant pile of money, but instead give away half of more of their money in their lifetime is a good thing. Now, I will observe that there are two problems with that. One is that a lot of the Giving Pledge people who said they'd give away half their money have been giving away a lot of money. And at the end of, 10, 20 years, they have more money than when they started. So this give half away thing,
that's the Zuckerberg clause, isn't it?
Yeah. And they just keep getting richer, right? And so that's the second part.
But there's a lot of tax implications of this, of course.
Well, but I mean, I don't think you do it for the tax benefits. And these guys have the best lawyers they can buy. They're professionals at avoiding taxes by and large. But I think Gates and a few other people have actually said, paying taxes is a good thing. I mean, I think Schwarzenegger said that means I'm winning, right? But that's not the way your average business, tech company, billionaire thing. They're trying to do tax avoidance. But anyway, I think the bigger issue in our world, in our system, is that we have a system where the rich get richer and the gap between the rich and the poor is getting bigger. And the question is philanthropy going to solve that? And the answer is no. It clearly doesn't solve that. Even, we've had all this philanthropy, but if you think about what's really changed the world for the better, I don't know, it's China and India getting richer, right? It's economic development is what helps poor people not be poor people. And philanthropy, working around the edges, better vaccines, less disease. These are great things to work on. Getting more kids in school, more girls in school. These are good things to work on. But, ultimately, the people who take care of the health of a nation is generally their government. And we're now seeing that governments that weren't in charge of keeping their people healthy are now having to take on that responsibility. It's going to be a wrenching time. A lot of people are going to die, but who knows? Maybe we'll end up in a decent place with, let's say, African governments actually paying for the health of their people.
Yeah, you mentioned Jeff Skoll, Pierre Omidyar. They both gave away your money. You're a fellow at the Skoll Foundation. Omidyar is a highly political philanthropist, very much on the progressive side. Could you argue that rather than becoming a philanthropist, a better investment might be somebody like Reid Hoffman, who's giving all his money or given a lot of his money to the Democratic Party. In fact, now he seems to be in the crosshairs of Donald Trump. So rather than trying to do good, it's wiser and ultimately more efficient to give one's money to political parties.
Well, and again, I'm speaking as a nonpartisan independent, but if you look at the long,
well, I'm sure you have some. I mean, no one's really known.
I might have some leanings, but if you look at the track record of the last 30 years, and you look at conservative donors, they've made gigantic, long-term, unrestricted financial commitments to projects that are advancing, their interests, whether it's the Heritage Foundation or the Federalist Society or whatever. And the progressive side has been disorganized as hell. They give you a year of money, and then the election goes by, and then the money goes away. And so I'd say that, yeah, done well, it probably would have been an excellent investment. Reid Hoffman is an example, and at least he's trying stuff. Some of the stuff he's done hasn't worked, or in hindsight. But those kind of experiments are going on relentlessly on the conservative side, and it's paid off. And on the progressive side, whatever they've done hasn't worked as well. And I'm not a political guy myself, but I just look at this and go, gosh, I wish they'd done a better job of, keeping the system more in balance than it is right now.
And what about the Musk model, maybe the Musk-Bezos model of financing travel in the universe, discovering other planets, maybe creating civilizations on Mars? Certainly, Musk would argue, I'm not sure about Bezos, he seems to be preoccupied with other things these days, but they would argue that their money is much better invested in these long-term projects, big, ambitious projects that seem kind of absurd and then become real.
Well, some of these people are animated by effective philanthropy or effective altruism. The idea that, you want to invest your philanthropic dollars for the maximum bang for the buck. That's gotten kind of out of control. There are people who actually make the argument that, you shouldn't care about the 7 billion people that are here. They're a lost cause. I'm going to worry about, stopping an asteroid from hitting, the Earth in 100 years, or I'm going to try to stop Gen AI from killing us all. And I don't know. I find this, antiseptic, not very human friendly. And so, but the thing that really ticks me off is, all right, you want to invest in something that's more effective, and you've identified, vaccinations or anti-malaria bed nets, and that's great. And if that's how you want to give away all your money, saving lives that way, wonderful. It's when people start wagging their fingers and say, oh yeah, anything that isn't this is not worthwhile. And we've heard a lot of those lectures from some of the more libertarian, effective altruism types. It's like, it's immoral that you're actually, investing in women's rights or gay rights or putting kids in school, because you can't measure the impact as well as I can measure deworming. And I'm like, okay, look, you do you, but there's an awful lot of bad things going on in the world. And I'm glad that we have some diversity of people who go out and tackle them because they think, women's rights is an important issue and we should work on it.
Yeah, and effective altruism, of course, has attracted all sorts of odd characters like Sam Bankman-Fried, who another a former Palo Alto resident who is now somewhere else. So I think you're touching, Jim, on the thing that many people will think about, particularly in terms of the subtitle of your book. The new book, it's an MIT book, Technology for Good, how nonprofit leaders are using software and data to solve our most pressing social problems. Now, we'll get to that software and data in a second, but our most pressing social problems, a conservative might argue that our most pressing social problems is allowing young women to have abortions. How do you determine what our most pressing social problems actually are? You've you've suggested that you're not really political, but by definition, if you're a philanthropist and you're committing your life to technology for the good, aren't you political? Because you could choose all sorts of things to address, and it reflects, for better or worse, political values in determining what our most pressing social problems are.
Well, I mean, there are people who argue that believing in science is political. And I'm a scientist, right? I was trained at Caltech. I actually believe in data, actually believe that science works. I believe that the climate is changing. I believe humans have something to do with it. And when someone says, well, that's your opinion, I know 3 scientists, who are podiatrists who say that it isn't. It's like, okay. But so I actually do think there's a value system. I think science is one value system. Our international human rights norms is a value system, right? And so, and again, when people come to me and say, I want to solve the problem of women getting safe abortions, will you help me figure out my technology? I will talk to them. But sometimes I'm also talking to conservatives who say, hey, I want to get more people out of prison because I don't think the state should be imprisoning as many of their citizens. This is the weird bedfellows, is sometimes conservatives are on a side that I would describe as a progressive side, but they see it through a different lens that justifies the same kind of remedies. Great. Let's work together on advancing human rights, on stopping repressive governments from suppressing their populace. I mean, I spent a lot of years lobbying Congress. And what was I lobbying Congress about? Human rights and kids with disabilities getting educational opportunities. 80% of Congress was in favor of that. So it's not hard to find problems. But yes, now we have people who are just making up crap, unscientific stuff and throwing it out there. And people are going to believe it. And some of them are going to die or become disabled because they believed in a stupid vision that's not supported by reality or data. And I'm quite good about being on the side of data and, I don't know, the sustainable development goals or the UN human rights instruments. I think that's a pretty good frame to be approaching it. And I'm sorry if there are people who believe that women shouldn't leave the home. Okay, but I'm not supporting that.
You're in New York right now celebrating the 80th anniversary of the UN. We've done a couple of shows. There are some Americans who actually think that the UN acts against the US interest and that all this internationalism doesn't benefit the US. As a tech for good guy based in Palo Alto in California, do you try to balance US interests? You're a US citizen with maybe a global conscience or a sense of humanity around the world. How do you balance technology for the good for the US and for the rest of the world? And of course, there's the MAGA Trumpian argument that all this is a zero-sum game. So if you're giving money to perhaps Africa or anywhere outside the United States, then you're hurting the US.
Well, I think that's extremely short-sighted. I think, if you look at the way our economy has developed in the last 100 years, it wasn't a zero-sum game. Our world is so much wealthier now than it was 100 years ago. It's mind-boggling. And then to suddenly say, oh, if an African gets an education, it hurts me. It's like, you're nuts. You're absolutely insane. Why? Because, and frankly, I get in these arguments with my friends in Silicon Valley who are on the, sometimes conservative, sometimes libertarian. And I'm like, look, the nonprofit sector, when you give us money, we're market development capital for the capitalist system. If we take people from being poor and needing relief and aid to becoming middle class or working class, they become customers. Henry Ford got wealthy by by making cars that more people could afford and created an industry that blew the doors off of whatever it was before. So I just find that kind of rationale to be ahistoric, not very sophisticated when it comes to this. Now, and of course, let's talk about cutting off foreign aid. All right. People are stunned when I say, well, U.S. foreign aid, 80% of it goes to Americans. And they're like, what? what? And I'm like, oh yeah, the people who run all USAID programs, it's 80% Americans are getting that money. Where's the money being spent? It's being spent on American products and American staff. Yeah, we're spending some money in the developing world. Yeah, 20%. Where all that food aid? Where does it come from? Iowa. Oh no, we're not going to buy that food aid anymore because that hurts America. What does it do? It piles up in silos in Iowa. Does that help American farmers? No, it doesn't. But the facts or, objective truth doesn't seem to matter. So they'll just assert that it's a zero-sum game and we have to stop spending money this way. I don't know. I think it's very short-sighted. And, in a world that's going to see more climate change, more migration, more wars, I think there's a big argument to invest in keeping people in their country happy customers and not abject poverty, killing each other, and sucking the winds out of the global capitalist system. That's a bad outcome.
How much damage do you think this current administration has done in terms of its withdrawal of USAID? To the world in particular. I mean, I take your point on the US, but how meaningful, how many, we've done shows which authors, commentators have argued that the regime already has blood on its hands, that tens of thousands of people are dying in Africa, for example, because of the withdrawal of vaccines.
I believe that. I believe that's true. And, and there are different studies saying, whether it's, a few more million people dying in the next couple of years compared to, the counterfactual, which is that we just kept funding these things at the rate we were funding them. So I believe that's true. It's a choice, and our electorate chose this administration and they feel authorized to go out and go crazy with their agenda. And, the electorate hopefully will have a chance in 2 or 4 years to make other choices based on what they see is better for their family or their community, which is generally how I think people make decisions. But it's the UN, it's the worst global government we've ever had, except for all the other ones we've ever had. Democracy, worst system you can imagine, except for all the other ones that we've tried. So it's, getting humans to go in a good direction is hard. And, it's 2 steps forward and 1 step back, or 4 steps back and 1 step forward. But, I tend to join the crew that's trying to keep us moving forward. And I think that ultimately the business community is going to start pushing to say, don't hurt the economy while you're pursuing your particular brand of social justice, or lack thereof.
A few days ago, we did a show with Jacob Ward, an East Bay journalist. He actually works with the Amidia Foundation. He wrote a book a few years ago called The Loop, how technology is creating a world without choices and how to fight back, mostly about AI technology, but also broader digital technology. Your book is about how technology can do good. Software and data can improve the world. I mean, no one's going to argue that philanthropy is a bad thing, but why are you so convinced that tech can make the world a better place, Jim? Jacob Ward and many other skeptics, you know this better than I do, are arguing that all this technology is creating, even without big tech, is creating surveillance society, alienation, loneliness, atomization, misery, increases in teen suicide, and so on and so forth. Where's your belief still in technology for good?
Well, I think, and I earlier critiqued the rent-seeking or profit-seeking behavior of big tech companies that tend to hurt society. And mental health problems is just a classic example of this. Is they could have designed it in a way that reduced mental health issues, or certainly didn't exacerbate them, but they made more money by creating more mental health issues, more time on the platform, more advertising, more money. So I don't think it's a characteristic of tech, right? I think it's like design signals intent. And if your intent is make maximum money, then carnage as a byproduct is okay with you. I happen to be part of a community that's like, our intent is to make things better. Often we are on pennies trying to offset the carnage created by the for-profit world. So I work in teen mental health and helplines. And I believe that we can use the same tech tools to do a better job of serving people, stopping them having mental health issues. And that's the world I want to work on. I'm sorry that it doesn't make enough money to engage enough of the for-profit world. And of course, think about where I started. I mean, I started an AI company, and our product could help disabled people. What AI has done for people with disabilities has been mind-blowing. And it's not a two-edged sword, though I'm sure there's fewer people doing data entry now than we're doing data entry 30 years ago because the AI has gotten better at it. But, blind people are able to read independently. People who don't have voices are going to be able to speak with synthetic voice. Deaf people are able to get access to things. People can hear translations. I don't want to just suddenly say technology, it's all terrible. There's a huge number of things it's done well. And I'm trying to work on the part of how do we harness those same tools to actually advance social good. And hopefully, whether it's the market or maybe someday again, regulation, constraining the most negative profit-seeking behaviors that cause the most social ills by constraining that. And we did that with cigarettes. And I hope that we do something similar with the negative impacts of, say, social media on kids.
How did we do that with cigarettes? It seemed to mostly come, and maybe with cars as well, it seemed to mostly come from the government. What was the role of philanthropists like yourself when it came to cigarettes?
Well, I think that it was scientists talking about the health problems with the cigarette companies trying to drown them out with fake science, right? I mean, this has all been exposed, right? And so it was philanthropists backing health education, putting pressure on the government. I mean, Ralph Nader, to pick up on cars, embarrassed the government into improving, regulation of automotive safety and like getting things like seat belts as a required part of cars. So this pattern has happened over and over again. The industry, whether it's oil and gas or cigarettes or cars, have got an economic interest in minimizing regulation. That's what they do. And so the goal of philanthropy and of science, and often science backed by philanthropy, if the government's not going to back it, is to actually say, no, we need to do something, and building support among the populace, saying, we don't like so many kids being killed in car accidents. We don't like the fact that, my parents died at 60 from lung cancer. And I think that, but these are 10, 20, 30-year projects in the past. And what's gone on with social media has hit us in a decade. And, so the tech bad things happen on a speed that is 5 or 10 times the way that we tend to regulate or respond to social ills. So it's an asymmetric battle, but you still got to fight it because otherwise it'll just run rampant.
Yeah, you do techmatters.org, so you do a lot of things in this space, but tech is such a broad word, Jim. You don't need me telling you this. There's AI, there's biotech, there's quantum computing. What is your focus? And in terms of the new book, Technology for Good, where are you most convinced that technology can actually help nonprofit leaders solve the world's most pressing social problems?
Obviously, I'm a software guy. I'm an algorithm guy. I'm a data guy. So I tend to look at the world through software and data, which is still plenty broad in terms of, where we can actually play. And I don't want to argue against advances in medicine or medical equipment or whatever it might be. I think those are all great. And I do spend some time in, let's say, global public health. But I think software and data, if you look at the average modern ambitious business, it's a software company masquerading as, a brokerage or an insurance company or a bank or a taxi company, to pick Uber and Lyft. And so why? Because it turns out that if you want to make money at scale, collecting data and figuring out where you're making money, where you're losing money, doing more of the former, less of the latter. That's modern business. And the nonprofit sector is 15 years behind the times. So it's a target-rich environment for tech and data, especially software and data. It's not lucrative enough to attract for-profit companies. And that's why it falls on open source developers, nonprofits, larger nonprofits that are building technology into their programs to deliver their programs, just like Uber is building all sorts of predictive analytics into their platform to extract more money from people who need to get from point A to point B.
How do you square, Jim, in your mind? You're a data guy and you're obviously interested in the way in which AI can make the world a better place. How do you square that with the more and more pieces about the consequences of big compute for AI, the environmental consequences? More and more pieces have been written about that. Are you careful when you make your investments, when you do your work in technology for good or techmatters.org, the way in which technology is, so to speak, produced?
It's a big issue in the nonprofit sector, right? People are worried about the impacts on energy and carbon and water that these giant data centers will have. Of course, I tend to believe we're in a bubble and that it's not going to be quite as bad as projected, because I just don't think the economics are there for the current fad that we have. But I've been through a lot of tech bubbles, and I just think this is another one. But I think that if you're in the social good sector, if you're 15 years behind the times, you don't have to be using the latest frontier model to actually be able to do things. So I think that I have a lot of conversations with nonprofits where I say, hey, you run a little bit of experiment on this, and then we're going to get a small, really energy efficient model to run your service. It may be 6 months behind the leading edge, but you were 15 years behind the leading edge. So, let's not sweat the 6 months. Let's not go crazy using the maximum energy solutions. I think there's a ton of space here. And of course, these trade-offs are not absolutes. You can't say AI is bad because it uses energy. You have to say, what else are we spending our energy on? And, and if I can save 1,000 lives for the cost of energy of lighting a home for a year, I'll take that bargain, right? So it's what's the relative thing? What is society spending to treat this problem in terms of energy, in terms of carbon impact, by doing it in a bad way where people are suffering a lot? Well, what if you could actually remedy that? Wouldn't that save us? It's the same kind of thing about why we'd rather prevent disease than treat it after it happens. And so I'm keeping those things in mind. But right now, everyone in the nonprofit sector is worried. They're worried about energy. They're worried about ethics. They're worried about algorithmic discrimination, because they know that the way these things are all trained discriminate against brown people and people in the rest of the planet. So I have to overcome that reluctance by basically explaining how we're countering bias and not going crazy on the energy side, so that they feel comfortable that we're within the realm of reason rather than profligate with society's and the planet's somewhat limited resources or ability to absorb CO2, for example.
And we've done lots of shows on that. So you're suggesting, and I think that sounds very wise, that even the nonprofit community needs to be morally flexible, shall we say, and understand that pure good might work in another universe, in another life, but not in this life.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm an engineer, right? I solve problems. Every real world problem has trade-offs. And I think that we're at a stage where in social good applications of tech, the trade-offs are not that hard to make. And whereas in big tech, the trade-offs have been made in bad ways and at gigantic scales. The nonprofit sector is not there. So in some ways, making these sort of balanced decisions is easier when you're stuck in 1995.
Yeah, I mean, as an engineer, do you approach these things in quantifiable terms? So when you figure out what is my next project, do you think, well, this is hurting 1 million people versus 5 million? Is that how you determine your priorities?
Yeah, I mean, I am interested in scale. And there's another thread of the nonprofit sector that is small is beautiful, right? You do that. I'm a software and data guy, right? I can't justify spending a couple $1 million to create a new nonprofit social enterprise, not $100 million, but a couple $1 million, if I'm going to help 5,000 people. It just doesn't make sense. So that's not a good spend. But if I can do something for a few $1 million that helps 5 or 10 million people, well, okay, that's $1 a person or less. Okay, what ill am I saving? Oh, I'm saving society something that costs it $100 a year. Wow, what a return. So I am doing that calculation, and I'm most interested not in being 10 or 20% better than the status quo. I'd like to be twice as good, or 10 times as good, or 50 times as good. And those opportunities exist in the nonprofit sector because so much of what the nonprofit sector is doing isn't moving bags of rice. They're actually pushing our information. I mean, health, education, rights work, these are all information problems. Well, guess we've got information technology. And so it's not hard for me to find something where I think that the potential of doing something 5 or 10 times better is there. And then that makes it exciting to go after, as opposed to something that is 10% better or can only help a few thousand.
To bring in big techs, focus on scale to the nonprofit. Finally, Jim, there are going to be people watching this who are going to be inspired, and I'm sure your work and your new book, Technology for Good, is inspiring. In conclusion, and people are going to say, well, what area should I be in? Should I be in environment? Should I be in AI? Should I be in biotech? Should I be in the computer area or energy? Where are you most optimistic and most pessimistic in terms of the challenges of the realizable future, say in the next 25 years between now and mid-21st century? What do you fear least and most in the world these days? Easy final question.
Well, yeah, easy one. Well, the thing is that I tend to meet people where they are. What's your skill? If you're a communicator, there's opportunities to do communications, right? If you're a product manager, what cause do you care about? And so I just tend to channel people on what expertise do you have to bring and what's your passion? And the nonprofit sector can use you at that intersection. Now, I'm an AI guy, but I grew up in the old AI world, right? There's so much more we can be doing with plain old machine learning. And I think that in some ways, that's still actually more exciting. There's more things to be done there than going crazy over what generative AI can do. I think that but I do see, I envision that we could be using AI to do amazing things in mental health within the next 5 years, because we're never going to have enough people to help solve our mental health issues. And not all our mental health issues are caused by tech, right? There's plenty of other reasons for mental health issues out there, poverty, war. And so I'm a big believer in that. I think that we in the nonprofit sector can watch the mistakes the for-profit world makes. I'm happy that people are spending hundreds of billions of dollars. And if a bunch of it's wasted, I'm glad that's not philanthropy wasting that money. Wait until they've proven what this stuff is actually good for. And and people like me coming out of the tech industry can use the skills that we've built in the tech industry to solve some amazing social problems using that technology that's already been invented and de-risked.
Well, Jim Fruchterman, author of Technology for Good, How Nonprofit Leaders Are Using Software and Data to Solve Our Most Pressing Social Problems. For anyone interested in how technology can make the world a better place, it's an essential read. And thank you so much. Thank you also for helping me with my speech next week. Really good.
Good luck with that speech, Andrew.
Thank you, Jim. We'll have you back on the show.
I hope so.